Okay, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. Thank you all for your patience. We're running a little bit late today, but I assure you it's worth it. Thomas and my pre-show prep will make this awesome. I'm with Thomas Dimitroff, the CEO of Sumer Sports. I'm Eric Eager, one of the VPs of Sumer Sports. Matt Stopsky in the back. I forgot to give Stopsky a shout out, Thomas, last week when you got up and walked out the room, walking out of the room. I quickly defaulted to what hey, for Thomas, for Eric. I forgot for producer Matt Stopsky. So Matt's behind there with us. Really appreciate people already, coming in with the comments to this show. We're going to talk a little bit about wide receivers because they stole the show this weekend at the NFL draft, at the NFL Combine. After you stole the show, Thomas, because as I said last week when we recorded, one of my favorite things to do at the Combine is to stand about 15 feet back and watch you operate. You are from a social standpoint, a role model for me. Just incredible the way about you. But I hope you had fun. Did you have fun in Indianapolis? I sure had fun hanging out with you and all my great friends throughout the league.
We had a great time. You know that. I only laugh at your lead-ins on all these things because they're utterly ridiculous. I'm just doing my thing, man, keeping my head above water, being around you, being the socialite, the data scientist extraordinaire. I mean, you wrote the book on data science, and you're walking around there, and everyone's tugging on you. I think there are more people tugging on you from a data standpoint, football data standpoint, than I've seen ever. So I think that's a great thing when you go and pitch yourself to an owner one day to be a GM. You can just say, look, man, I can also get on TV and I can answer for your program, for your organization. We can go on and on about this. It was a great time there. You and I know that. Loved being at St. Elmo's. Had a couple good bottles of wine, ate great food. You guys went out and socialized, and I went back up to my room to do some work. How's that?
Exactly. And it was funny. Like, we all kind of had that moment in our one of our founders, Jack Jones, where we're up there working on this talk for Sloan at 10:30 p.m. And, all of us were out working late, having fun late. It was a good time. Now, somebody who's going to have even more good times than we are, having just signed a 2-year, $52 million deal, $35 million guaranteed. A guy, Thomas, who was in your division for a great number of your years as the general manager of the Atlanta Falcons, Mike Evans. Mike Evans was coming off, talking about a guy, 10 straight 1,000-yard seasons to start a career, longevity that has been the marvel of the position. But he had kind of been on the decline, both from a volume standpoint and efficiency standpoint. Last year, he hit another bump. He was going to be a key free agent with T. Higgins taking the franchise tag to stay in Cincinnati. Evans was going to be the premier player at that position in free agency. Now he's gone. A couple things. You got to spend some time with Jason Light, who I've been calling Jason Wright on this show because he's made a lot of great moves of late. They were once a team, Tampa Bay, that paid as they went, right? No guaranteed money after the first year. Not really, not a lot in terms of signing bonus, not a lot of terms in kind of prorating the thing out, no void years, nothing like that. They ate a lot of costs this year. We're still competitive, won that division for the third straight year. And now they're going back into it and being competitive with Mike Evans. A, what does this signal about Jason Light and what he's about to do? But B, what does this do when you're a general manager and you were maybe a team like Kansas City, a team like Houston with all kinds of cap room and a young quarterback, where you were kind of banking at least on having an opportunity to go after a Mike Evans in free agency? How does that affect your draft strategy come April?
Well, let me say, first of all, I'm not a huge fan on acquiring a free agent receiver as much as I am, as you can imagine, going after a young buck in the draft, right? That's always been something that I think is fresh and clean. You develop that guy in your world, in your group of players, around your coaches, around your scheme. That I've always loved. That said, let me start by Jason Light / Jason Wright. You're exactly right. I mean, Jason is kicking butt. I'm a huge fan of Jason personally, but also with his ability in his later years, not later years, but veteran years as a GM, I just continue to step back and smile at some of his moves, because I think they're thoughtful. I think they show the true maturity of a general manager and team building. I think something like this is a very smart move for them. He knows them. They know him. There's nothing like continuing to pay that guy that has 2 or 3 more years, and you keep him in your group, how you have raised him. I think it's great. And I think it's good for the organization. I think it's obviously good for Mike Evans. I don't think it's real good necessarily for some of the other teams in the division. I do know, however, though, when you start talking about other free agents out there, how is this going to affect all those teams out there that were thinking about going into free agency? And now they say, let me step back and let me compare what's out there in free agency now and what's out there in the draft. And it's going to be a lot tougher without a guy like this in there to not only go after Mike Evans, but to go after a couple other players that might start surfacing. I read recently where I think it was Michael Pittman, where I think Chris Ballard mentioned that he's not going to let him get to the market. So who are the next group, right? When you're talking about Marquise Brown, Calvin Ridley, as you mentioned, are those the guys we're talking about?
Yeah. So if you go by just number of percentage of snaps played this year, the top free agents are, 27-year-old Michael Pittman, 2nd round pick out of Ohio State for the Colts, who has been pretty solid as the number 1 receiver there. Calvin Ridley, who you drafted, but he's at age 30. He played 85% of the snaps for the Jaguars coming off of that suspension. A very good bounce back year for him, but not maybe necessarily the year that everybody in the fantasy community expected him to have. I think that they would probably really want to have him back in the Jaguars. I know that there's some stipulations where if the Jaguars do let him walk, they do get some compensation. So there's something there. Gabe Davis, who's the number 2 receiver for the Buffalo Bills, those are kind of the only 3 players available, Thomas, in free agency at that position who have played more than 80% of their team snaps last year. After that, it goes Tyler Boyd, who's a third wide receiver, KJ Osborne, who's a 3rd wide receiver, Josh Reynolds, who's a 3rd wide receiver. Marquise Brown's a starter in this league and a 1,000-yard player, former 1st-round pick. I think he'll have a market. Darnell Mooney's had 1,000 yards before, so is DJ Chark. And then now you're getting down to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who was just released by the Chiefs. So it's not, to your point, I think as well as anybody, having been in this seat, if these players get to free agency, there's something – and we're not even sure Pittman's going to get there, to your point. So let's assume Pittman's not getting there. Every player I just talked about has a real weakness, and yet you're going to be trying to outbid other teams, right? If you're going out and outbidding a team for Gabriel Davis, well, Gabriel Davis has games where he scores 4 touchdowns, but has games where he doesn't catch a pass, right? You really want to pay him $18 million a year when he's not a down by down player? Do you really want to pay Marquise Brown, who's been hurt a bunch in his career, number 1 wide receiver money? It's a real tough thing. And that's kind of why I think all eyes were on the NFL draft this weekend and how everybody performed in the various combine measures. Well,
that's exactly right. That's a really interesting group of wide receivers in my mind. And not only the first rounders, not only the top, the 1s and /1-2s, but also the 3s and 4s. You can find some really good value out there, some really good football players who are going to develop into, I think, legitimate, potentially even into starters. And I think they're there for you. Again, the value of going into free agency at the receiver position is not something that most teams are real gung-ho about unless you're signing your own guy. Remember, when we signed Julio Jones in his 3rd contract, we went to $22 million. The world lost their mind again when I dealt with Julio, similar to when we traded for him, of course, or traded for the pick. What is your mind on that? Because we're talking about 20. What's the number right now?
26 APY, and you're probably going to pay for that over a number of years because of voids. A 2-year deal probably is a 5-year deal with voids added on. But it's going to be it's significant. It's higher than what Julio is making at the time. To your point.
Yep, exactly. And look, we can talk all day about it. The fact is, there are some good football players there in the young group in the draft that I think a lot of people are going to be lighting up, watching as it comes on. Some guys we'll be talking about today are hitting it big. Other guys can climb. Other guys can fall down the board. We'll talk about that though, Eric, because let's be real about what the combine is. And believe me, I'm gonna raise my hand. I'm a big combine fan because I love being able to compare player to player in an athletic setting. I know it doesn't have anything to do with the real nuts and bolts of hitting in the lines, et cetera, but this is still a very important part. So let's want to move into the receivers. That'd be great.
Well, initially I was going to talk from like best to worst, but let's just talk about the one big piece of history, which is that Texas wide receiver Xavier Worthy set a new combine record by running a 4.21. Now, I think most of us know that speed at wide receiver matters, right? It's the reason Marquez Valdez-Scantling got $10 million from the Chiefs, even though he really isn't that great of a wide receiver, because that skill set, you want a guy. Will Fuller was always prized in the NFL because he had the speed that defenses prized. Henry Ruggs was the first wide receiver taken in a draft that included Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, and Justin Jefferson, right? And because of that deep speed that everybody prizes. So deep speed very clearly matters in the NFL. Darius Hayward-Bay was drafted 7th overall. And so we care about these things. John Ross, the guy who Xavier Worthy beat in the 40-yard dash, was drafted 2 picks ahead of Patrick Mahomes by the Cincinnati Bengals. So we do very much have precedent for this really mattering. Now, 2 teams, but does it matter on the field? And these are the guys who have had the best 40-yard dashes in the history of the combine. John Ross, Marquise Goodwin, Henry Ruggs, Jacoby Ford, J.J. Nelson, and Tyquan Thornton. There's not a ton of individual success out of those players. And so the question then becomes to me is, Xavier Worthy was about 107th this past year in what's called yards per route run, which is basically an efficiency metric which says when you're on the field, is your team throwing it to you, and are you converting those throws into yards? It's a very good metric in that you want wide receivers that the college team prefers throwing it to, and then they're open and all that stuff, and they can convert, whether it be through air yards or through yards after the catch. And so Worthy was not terrible. It's a 2.14. He's 107th in college football. Some of the other guys we're going to talk about are 6th and 1st and 10th and 20th. So this is a guy who's productive in college, but not uber productive. We would probably put him at where? Like a 2nd-round pick, Thomas, before the whole draft. How much does that move him? And because it's moving him, and we've seen the history of that event, is the team that's taking him, are they almost always overdrafting him by definition?
So to your point, let's just say he was right around that 2nd, could teeter onto the back end of the 1st, could move into the top 10 picks in the 2nd round, depending. You go into the combine, you run the world's most famous 40 time for a receiver or ever, right? 4.21, which is smoking. And just by virtue of that, there are going to be teams now that are considering him, in my mind, in that 20 to 32 area, right? It depends where it goes. However, the fact that you have to not only be able to run straight, we've talked about this, one of the biggest and most important things for receivers is to be able to gather their weight, have body control, ultimately separate. Separation is huge for the receiver position. You can see a receiver that runs a 4.44 or a 4.45 or a 4.50 and separate amazingly better than a 4.21 guy, and you may sway towards the 4.44 guy, right? Just because. It's amazing to see these times. We're awestruck watching it and thinking, wow, if we put this, if we put this guy to the right spot and we continue to let him grow in that position, and we could smoke people with this type of speed, I mean, we all salivate over it. That said, it doesn't happen at times as much as we think it would, because there's just a difference in the route running ability, right? So I think it's important for us to watch closely on how this is going to be. And again, I've been around some really, really fast players. You brought a guy up here and really good route runners, more importantly, like Calvin Ridley was one of the most pure separate ability route runners that I've ever been around. and yet obviously he can't run with Worthy, right? So it's going to be really interesting to see how people. And I harken back to. Do you remember this name? You're pretty young, but do you remember the name Ronaldo Nehemiah?
Yeah.
Remember?
He's a track athlete and he was Raiders, right? Because the Raiders brought.
I think it was San Francisco. He was San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
If I'm not mistaken, one of our guys on here, gals on here, can let us know. I think it was that. My point is, we've always tried to find the speed guys in this league, corners and of course receivers, and some are
You're
cut
absolutely
off.
right. Won a Super Bowl with the Niners in '84, but only 43
catches?
career catches.
43. Okay. My point is,
I think about similar guys like Willie Gault, James Jett, basically everybody Darius Hayward-Bay, basically everybody the Raiders drafted under Al Davis because he loved those kind of players, and all of his quarterbacks, Jay Schrader, Todd Maranovich, all the quarterbacks were Chuck guys, right? And you sort of but those guys couldn't. They weren't. Even I talk about Valdez-Scantling. When the ball's in the air, no one's more clueless than Marquez Valdez-Scantling. But the guy runs a 4.3, and so he's on the field.
While I'm doing this, look up the 3-cone for Worthy while we're looking at it. First of all, we watched him, right? We watched him go in circles. I think, did he do it 7 times? I don't know. But let me just tell you this. I mean, when you are a general manager and a head coach as team builders and you're looking at what you're going to do and you continue to get your ass beat by a smoking receiver like Tyreek Hill, all you want and you daydream about every day of your life while you're in that seat is, how am I going to get someone to match that guy and shove it down their throats like they've been shoving it down ours, right? You have this unbelievable craving to get speed to take off the top, because if you can take it off the top like that, all of that stuff underneath with those really adept tight ends and underneath guys, to me, they can run roughshod. So it's a really interesting thing.
I actually don't. So I don't know if.
Did he not run it?
I don't think he ran it, and I saw this somewhere, and I gotta be make sure. So don't don't hold me to this, crowd. But I don't think any of the wide receivers ran it because of where it was in the day. And I don't think a lot of receivers have run the 3-cone in the last few years.
I got all these 24 3-cones here on that very nice, Luke McCaffrey, 6'7".
Okay, so they had so 3-cone.
You told me that you sent this to me.
Yeah. Okay, so, but there was only 10 guys that ran the 3-cone at wide receiver. 9 guys.
Yeah, I don't see. Yeah. I see Rome. Yeah. So
and
I
Rome
thought
had a good workout.
6'8". Yeah.
Yeah. But because of where they put that in the day, when you look at if anybody's done modeling on the combine, there's a lot of missing data now because not a lot of people are benching anymore. Not a lot of people are doing the agility drills, and it's I think, in my opinion, hurting some of the data analysis that we're able to do. Okay, so Xavier Worthy going to move. A lot of Chiefs fans that follow me are oh my God, we're not going to get him. He's going to go before 32. And I say, and let me check me on this, Thomas, as a guy that built teams. But when the whole league is hot on a player for the combine, I think that's overblown, right? But B, doesn't that just push better players down to you?
Yes, no question about it. No question. Keep going.
If you're if Ladd McConkey, who is tested well, but also had a very good career at Georgia, if somebody's going to break a tie when it wasn't a tie in the first place based on 40 and the guy comes down to you, you're getting a better player in most cases, right? So I think fans, that's one thing I'll say to fans is don't be so worried about that, because if a guy's really moving up because of the strength of his combine workout, it's probably not a good thing for him. But I think just something to sort of throw out there. Let's talk.
Well, our adage was always, again, the moving up thing I was very, very concerned about. The moving down thing is a little bit easier to stomach when you see someone who is 2/10 slower, someone's running a 4.6 and you thought they were a 4.4, or a linebacker or a DN that you thought was going to rush the passer and be a 4.55, and all of a sudden he's a 4.95.
Yeah.
those are legits. And it's not just on the speed. It could be a lame agility drill where you all of a sudden see these guys going around a 3-cone and they have no body control, no explosiveness, can't bend. And then you start realizing, wow, I overshot on this guy's athleticism and agility. Let's go back, and more than likely they end up falling from that front board potentially to the backboard somewhere.
Right. And I think that this is a pretty good thing as well. And even as an analytics company, for people to hear, which is the analytics, or in this case, the data that comes out of the combine, is imploring you and your scouts and other team builders to go back and watch film. Because basically what you're saying is you had an evaluation on a player, and whether that be, whether that was maybe he played at La Tech and it wasn't as fast as you thought it was, or he played at, he's faster than you thought he was. But you have to go back and look at the film and be like, what did I miss when I put an eyeball on this player? Was he injured in the games that he played in, or was it the one game that he was actually healthy in? And he's almost always been hurt, including at the combine. And can I actually expect him to be off of these soft tissue injuries all the time to actually be the speedster that I saw in the one game I scouted him at? Whatever. I don't pretend to be a expert in scouting, but what you're trying to do is take the data and go back and look and be like, what did I miss with my eyes? The data is helping you kind of cross-check in some ways.
No question about it. And the data and cross-checking is something we would sit around many, many years. We'd watch the video, and then we'd spew out the data, and we would agree or disagree with it, or we would override at times when we're saying, we don't really care that he had that. He sort of slipped. We were analyzing that data with the video. It's, by the way, why I say to everyone, video is king. And if you can take all the data that's now coming out from great companies like Sumer, and you can apply the video to whatever the data and the models are and the algorithms are, you're going to bring the football people in that much more, Eric, because it feels real and there's legitimate context to it. It's another time, another story, but it is something that I think is important.
Yeah, it's just everything that we do in football analytics is derived from the film in some way, whether that be the chips on their shoulders or whether it be somebody on, scouting, putting a grade on a player. Like, that's unmistakable. And these checks often can help us. And there are far more checks than just going at the combine. Sometimes it's literally, taking the tracking data and measuring how fast he is, looking at what his speed grade is from the scouts. And if there's a conflict, trying to resolve that conflict among analyst, general manager, scout, like that's an incredibly big thing. A couple players that we're not going to get any information on was Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison. Both of those guys for us, you're looking at top 10 picks. They didn't work out at the combine. Marvin Harrison doesn't even show. That information, you're not getting the information from him face to face that you're getting. You're not even getting necessarily height and weight and everything from him. How does that affect it? And this is where I want to sort of bring it back to, how does Rome Odunze from Washington, who came in big, thick kid, 6'3", 215, runs a 4.47, did all the agility drills really well, film is really good, but, not quite as productive. So, when I look at Rome Odunze was 20th in college football in yards per route run at 2.93, Neighbors was first at 3.64. And then, Marvin Harrison was like 6th at 3.44. So it's a guy that very clearly production-wise was not as good as the top two, but he comes in, does really well at the combine, not afraid to compete. How much does that solidify a guy like that in terms of character, in terms of, does that bump him at all? Because to me, it feels like a very solid prospect that solidified his spot. Does it rise him up at all?
I believe it does. I mean, look, there's still a lot of us, and most of us, even though we might be evolving and understanding that we're not as old school as we used to be, or we don't adhere to some of the real old school approaches, we still want to see people train, right? We still want to see what J.J. McCarthy did there, throwing the ball where the other quarterbacks didn't, right? That's always something that stirs a part of us that kind of brings us back a little bit. Like that is the right thing to do, right? It's at the core, the competitive drive of what we all want in those individuals. That said, we're not going to move on from those people that are great who decide not to approach it that way, right? I had a really great conversation this afternoon with Albert Breer about this very thing. And I said, and Albert brought up the idea, this is the first generation and group that's coming through the combine now who were a part of NIL, right? Think about how this affects that group of people, right? I mean, doesn't mean right or wrong. It just means they have a different approach to how they're going to approach what was accepted before or not accepted before and now, right? Remember, when all of this first started happening, people stopped going to the Senior Bowl, and I see the parallel there to now it's going to be a situation maybe where Jeff Foster and NFS and National Scouting is going to have to deal with all these big-time players, the top 15, maybe 20, are deciding to pull away from the combine. There's still a need for the combine, right? There's a lot of players there. But we're going to get to the spot where it's this group of players might not show up, and you can't look at them with a wry eye and say, oh, that's not the kind of guy I want. We can't get away. You'd be pissing away so many great opportunities with football players if you took that approach. It's not, well, maybe it is dissimilar to back in the day when guys were testing positive for like one weed positive or, had multi-tats or multi-piercings and people generalized about these guys, right? We're so beyond that nowadays, right? Let's be real about why are you smiling? Let's be real about it, right?
It's funny. Like, I think of like Warren Sapp, right? Where like Tony Dungy's like, I always have I have this joke, and I actually attribute it to my friend Matthew Collar, who wrote it's like you draft the weed, like the weed guy, generally speaking, has worked out in the NFL. Warren Sapp was like worked out. But there's a limit. It's like if the guy's on some real hard drugs, there's a limit to all this stuff. And
wait.
To your point,
and I gotta stop because I've been a part of this. Or you draft the guy who's not just 1, 2, or 3 weed tests, everyone. Sometimes if you like a guy enough, and believe me, I'm not a supporter of it. I know it's legal everywhere. I'm just, when you get a player who
have to make a calculated gamble,
self-medicating, there's an issue there, right? Look, we can get into this discussion, but if you have a guy who's lackadaisical for some reason because he's smoking we would, I mean, if someone was smoking in the building, right? Not in the building, outside the building, but he was coming in and practicing, you could tell that right away, and you would address that immediately. Yeah. The kid goes home and he's gaming at night and he's smoking a blunt. It's a very different story, right? I mean, we used to say all the time, just so everyone knows, like those buildings have their own sort of walls and their moat around it, right? So conceivably, a player could be on the premises smoking in his car way out in the back 40 on the property, and no one would ever find him, and he would traipse back up into the room potentially and be in the meeting room, and a coach would say, wait a minute, man, you smell like whatever, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get off on this a ton. This is another conversation I want to have, but what I want to say to you is there's a difference between the 1 and the 2-time tester. If you have a 9-time tester, my guarantee is, everyone, he's probably tested 29 times at the school. So those are things we have to be very mindful of.
But to your point about the combine, like there's an element of being able to look in the guy's eyes and be like, I know you tested positive for weed when you were at the University of Miami, when everybody was doing weed, and yet you're here and you're prepared and you answer good questions and you test well and you haven't tested positive since. Yeah. That's an entirely different feeling for somebody like you, I'm guessing, than I Zoomed with this guy because there's no longer a combine. He wink, wink, nudge, nudge behind a StreamYard link. You know what I'm saying? Like the combine's essential in the sense that you or the people that you trust to help you run your football team are going to meet these men and at least have one conversation with them in person. That's what I'm sort of more to saying. It's like Tony Dungy, when he was the DC of the Vikings and they drafted Derek Alexander over Warren Sapp, was like, I met with Warren at the combine. He was fine. And then he goes to Tampa Bay and gets to coach the guy to the Hall of Fame. And like, there's probably a difference between Warren Sapp and Justin Blackman, right? And I'm guessing that if you are a keen evaluator, keen team builder, and you're at the combine and you're able to look the guy in the eye and talk to him because you're experienced and you've talked to thousands of these men before, there's value in that.
Well, look, I mean, again, I feel we might be tangential here. However, when you start talking to some of these high school coaches out there, right, who are now coaching programs around the country with states, of course, where it's legal, and we all get that. We all know where we are with that. Where we don't all know. But when you start talking to some of these coaches and they're saying, my groups of players over the last handful of years versus what they were aren't as driven, aren't as committed. Those are really interesting conversations to have. Is it going that way? So back to what we're talking about here. If you have players that are, I mean, let's call it the way it is. We know that it's obviously very common, and it's teach their own in a legal situation, right? Back in the day when it was illegal, football teams and management could hold it over their heads, right? That's not the case anymore, Eric, right? But does this lend credence to your guy Les then? Because I feel like about effing them picks.
Yeah, like I'm trying to think of, because from your perspective, because I talk to professors all the time, and they're all like, students are worse now than they were before, and I'm always like, shut up, you're just being like everybody has always said the kids these days are worse than when and yet I get every mechanism that you're talking about for why NFL players as people would be less prepared for the league now than they were 10, 20 years ago makes sense to me. I buy them. So if you are an evaluator and you're noticing that now, I bet you Joe Alt, son of John Alt, is probably prepared for the league. And I'm sure that Marvin Harrison Jr., son of Marvin Harrison, probably ready. But like, if the average player in the league you're meeting with as a GM and you're just getting like red flags in your head, like, fuck, Julio Jones, like, was an A+ personality, and I knew that I needed to go get him. And every other guy's kind of, I'm not sure if he's mature enough to spend this much capital on. Do you do what Les did and say, forget this nonsense? I'm bringing veterans into this team, and I'm going to figure this thing out later, Mr. Owner guy. That's what I think.
Well, no, that's a good thought. Maybe you do think that. I don't think that was the impetus, of course, for Les's approach, but it could fold in. It comes back to, let's get guys who have been in the league, and even if they are regular, users of marijuana, they're functioning and they're striving and thriving in it. Excuse me. Then we're like, okay, they've got it figured out. They're not just a young guy who's baked every day because he has the money in his pocket now. Let's pull back for a second here and be real about this. There are some amazing football players and athletes in every sport who choose to smoke weed regularly, and that's them, right? That's their idea. As a team builder person, as a GM, as a head coach, you just want to make sure that your people are focused. If you have an issue with someone who's, if that's all they're thinking about, Eric, and they are completely focused on, getting out of the building so that they can just go home and get baked, well, then that's obviously a different situation. It's the same like acquiring someone in the draft. We all know the reality of it all, right? Let's not argue that. Mm-hmm. But if it's an issue, and if you're talking to the people at these schools and you've done your proper research and it's surfacing that this guy's got myriad positive tests and issues around this, well, then you step back and you take a hard look at it. And you never know when someone gets in the league, do they up what they're doing exponentially more or not? It just depends where they are. And there's
Chris Carter, obviously one of my favorite players growing up. He always gave that rookie symposium. He said, money doesn't make you a different person. It just makes you a bigger version of whatever you were before you had money. And I do think that that's a very sage piece of advice. That's not true about everybody, but that's true about a lot of people. Right. And so if you to your point, these are things you have to worry about. And I think to wrap this kind of into the part about the combine before we wrap up the show is the question that you had, which is, do we still need the combine? And I think on the last show, you talk about smelling the pits, and you talk about like really watching them move next to other players. And I don't think people realize, like, I went to the Iron Bowl with Stopsky earlier, and you even watch a game like that, and you can pick out, and I don't have as keen of an eye as you, but I can pick out the 6 to 8 players that are going to the NFL, and they're moving around against other players who are not going to the NFL. And so so somebody like me who doesn't have a keen scouting eye, I go to a college game, it's not that valuable for me. So I can understand somebody who does have one, going and wanting to watch Rome Odunze run a route and then watch Xavier Worthy run a route, and back to back. Because the other way is for you to take out and you don't take out film anymore, but get in get in Exos or get in wherever and click, and then click on another guy and watch. And you just want to watch them run back to back. You want to watch JJ McCarthy try to throw left, and then watch Michael Penix try to throw left back to back. You want this in your brain, right? And then additionally, you want to talk to JJ McCarthy, and then 10 minutes later, talk to Michael Penix and be like, which guy's got more of a clue? And I think all those things have value, don't they?
They all have value. And look, it makes our life easier when we're able to juxtapose, and that whole back to back idea is big for us as evaluators, right? There's nothing like that. So to be able to go to the combine, to be able to interview someone right next to the next person, the next quarterback, whatever it is, that's invaluable, right? So look, it's going to change, and it will continue to change. And we have to be adaptable in the profession, or they do now, right? As general managers and head coaches, and the owners have to rely on their guys to dig in. And if they don't do it at the combine, it just means fire up the private jets, Mr. Owner, because we are coming. And there's going to be,
And there's one more question that Beat Gamer had, which is a very good one. I want your answer, and then I'll give mine as a data scientist, because before we wrap up, because this is another dub point, but he says, how do NFL GMs adjust combine workouts compared to pro day? Do they value one more than the other? I think that your answer to this will be very valuable here.
Well, look, mostly we value the one that we are at live. It starts with the combine. And now that they have the combine turf situation set up well, and we're able to see them there back to back to back, to me, those are the important workouts. When it comes to the pro day workouts, of course, we love them. It's one more notch on the belt as you're getting closer to making your decision on someone. If someone, flails around in the combine and he's coming off of an injury, or for some reason he wasn't on, we will override with the pro day if we see the pro day is legit. If we know we're going to a pro day, quite honestly, and I won't mention names at this point, and it's historically a school, 2 or 3 or 5 of them, who completely run the pro day, who determine where the quarterback is going to throw, how he's going to throw, how he's approaching the workout. Well, that's very different, right? If it's a coach on the staff from the college and they're not allowing the pro people to take care of it, of course the pro day is very different than it would be at the combine. So again, there are many levels to this, Eric, that we could talk about. The reality is most people would love to see it at the combine because we are right there. That said, pro days can be invaluable for us as well. We get a chance to see them one last time.
Yeah, for sure. We always had to, when I was at, I wrote an article for PFF, and we actually do this at Sumer as well. The average pro day is just better than the average combine. So you always have to adjust down. So, and there was the one year in 2021 where you didn't have a combine, so you had to be a little bit, but that it is you just, home cooking is a thing, right? It's home field advantage in every single walk of life is a thing. And so you do have to adjust down, but it is valuable information.
Okay. So the only important thing here is we are in a very controlled environment, which most scouts, general managers, and head coaches want, right? At the combine. Back to my point a little bit earlier, or my allusion, when the program is taking care of that, Michigan or wherever it may be, of course it's on their dime, right? It's them, they dictate. And so we have to be very mindful of watching what they do dictate and what they don't. And that's where you can say it as someone who's not pulling the trigger because you think there's a pomp and circumstance to some of these colleges, right? It looks great. But again, you're out of the control of the combine. That's a little bit uneasy at times. Take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, exactly. And, a lot of times, and before we wrap up here, a lot of times you're looking for a reason to do something. You want to draft a player, but you need like if you were I can't remember if Julio ran a 40 at the combine. I believe he did, but let's say you really wanted Julio, you want him to run a 40 at Alabama's pro day just to make sure, right? And so that number is going to have more value to you than Xavier Worthy if he runs a 4.15 at Texas pro day. And you're like, okay, that's even more. Sometimes you just need a guy to slap on a number so he's not slower than you thought.
And let me just be clear, when I was saying earlier that there might be a quarterback coach from the college running it or whoever that person is, right? Most of the time, everyone, just so you know, it's the coaches from the NFL who run the drills. If they're a couple linebackers, couple defensive backs, a receiver, and a tight end at a specific school, the position coaches from the teams in the NFL that are at the pro day run the drills. It's rarely the college coaches, except for the quarterback situation is where it gets a little bit dicey at times. So what I'm saying is it's a really good setup, of course, both sides of this on the combine and the pro days. And I think it just depends on where that player was when he ran at the combine or performed at the combine versus the pro day. And the last thing I'll say, when we wait and say we're waiting to get as healthy as possible or in the best shape possible, there is merit to that, right? When you're looking at your owner and you pray to God, the guy that you want to pick or move up 20 something spots, runs the best time he can. That's important, right? If he ran a 4.55 at the combine and he's able to run a 4.45 at the pro day, that looks a lot better when your owner's looking over your shoulder saying, okay, this is a guy we're moving up 20 spots in the first round for. We always joked about that, by the way. It's funny. When we had a low time on someone, I would say to everyone, you find, and I don't know if you remember me saying this to you, I would tell our scouting staff, you find the best legitimate time out there on this guy because we're not going into this with a 4.62 on this safety. And so it was kind of tongue-in-cheek.
And I do think people need to realize before we wrap up how tenuous it can be. I've run 40s before. So is Thomas. Thomas is a Guelph Griffin. I am a Minnesota State Moorhead Dragon. Mine have varied by 0.15 depending upon the week in training camp. So it could just have been a bad day for a player. And so just be careful about those measurements because they do vary wildly, depending upon what you eat, depending upon those kind of things. So all data is good. Data is good, but just know that there are significant error bars around them as well. Awesome. This was great. This was a lot of fun. Thank you for all the questions in the chat. We will be making our SiriusXM debut this Friday. We will also be posting it back the following Monday. We appreciate you all for following along. Our ability to go on SiriusXM is because of your loyal listenership and the great, the great questions, the great feedback, the awesome, patrons of the show that you have been. So we really do appreciate that. We hope to see you on Friday at our new home. Go ahead, Thomas.
I didn't mean to interrupt
you. Put your hand up.
No, I was saying this is a great example of the discussions that happen in draft rooms and around NFL teams about arguing about that player who tested positive or that player who didn't work out at the These are all discussions that we have at so many levels. So you guys get an opportunity to see how it all plays out because no one ever has the right answer on it, of course.
Perfect. It's awesome. And every once in a while I have these naive views about things and they need to be checked by Thomas, which is my favorite thing. So for producer Matt Stopsky, for Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.